The negative animus mainly manifests as an opinionated resistance against having feelings of love. And that's why, especially if a woman has a tendency to fall in love or to be even only interested in a man, then her animus comes up and makes her ruin the relationship.
A woman's inner man can make her life heaven or hell. In his negative form, he's a seductive swindler who cuts a woman off from her feminine identity. But in his positive role, he brings her spiritual strength and connects her to the self.
So that would be a secret voice in her that whenever she follows her own feeling, something says, no, that's crazy, don't do that. You are crazy if you do that. The animus is the most frequent possession in a woman, that she's suddenly entered by a mood of male determination, cold, generalizing thinking, opinions, behaving like everybody else, not doing anything shocking to everybody. An impulse towards rash, brutal, determined action, which is not at all in her feminine character. But nowadays the absolute fashion is to be rational. And that is absolutely destructive to feeling. And it hits men and women equally, but women even more, because women in generally put more emphasis on personal relationship and personal feelings, and therefore they are hit first. And that's why women are nowadays so unhappy and in a general revolt against many things. They feel that they are thwarted of their life. Naturally, it hits men too, because if women go crazy and become disagreeable and cold, it reverberates on the sons and on the partners and on the men as well.
It may make her rigid and opinionated. She thinks she knows everything. When she's alone, she thinks she knows nothing. Her aloneness feels like ice and glass to herself and to others. Negi is the negative animus. And if you have a word like that, you could say, that is his voice, not mine, and I'm not going to be put down by it.
Sometimes a woman finds herself in an argument she never meant to start. Words come out with absolute certainty. Her tone and verdict are final. A mind full of conclusions and a soul that feels barren. In Jungian psychology, this pattern has a name. It's called Animus possession. When we speak of the Animus, we are speaking of a psychological fact of inner experience, not a theory and not a social or cultural construct. It's an archetypal and autonomous element within a woman's psyche. It's an inner masculine force that can empower a woman or disturb and tyrannize her. It can present itself as thought, judgment, or principle. It often enters her psyche with the authority of something that seems self-evident. That is why it is so difficult to recognize. It does not announce itself as foreign to her. It speaks with the voice of I. And yet, if we observe carefully, we notice that its tone is impersonal, general, and final. It is a verdict. It declares that things are always like this, or never like that, period. In such moments, we can legitimately speak of a psychological possession. An autonomous factor has taken hold of the ego, which, without realizing it, becomes its instrument. This does not mean that masculinity in a woman is a problem. Without a developed inner masculinity, she remains too exposed to life. She cannot defend what is true for her. She cannot act when action is required. She cannot take responsibility or maintain direction over time. The danger is one-sidedness. When the masculine factor is not consciously related to by the woman, it becomes hostile to relatedness. It convinces her that feeling is dangerous or irrelevant. It sabotages relationships. It makes her rigid, cold, overly rational, and cut off from her subjective living experience. In most cases, the first formation of the animus is connected with the father. The first man in a woman's life is not only a person, he is also an image, an archetype. If a girl's value was bound too tightly to that image, she may later seek the same authority in every man, or fight it in every man, while remaining inwardly bound to it. And when she attempts to step out of that spell, the animus can attack precisely what would free her feeling function, her spontaneity, and her intuitive personal truth. In the material you are about to watch, our task is to observe and recognize where those inner and outer patterns are living in us, not to judge and moralize, but to learn to consciously discern, to distinguish what we truly think from what thinks in us, to notice where opinion replaces encounter, and where the inner father still dominates under different disguises. If we can make that distinction, change will become possible. More inner space will emerge, allowing us to lead our lives, personalities, and relationships more consciously. The same figure that tyrannizes can become a guide. The same energy that destroys relatedness can become a support for truth. But this only happens when we turn toward it, instead of acting it out blindly or projecting it onto the outer world and fighting it there. This video is a mirror, and if we can master the courage to look right at it, to turn around and face what is chasing us, the whole story begins to change. Let's dive in.
When Jung describes a woman locked in the animus, he says that she's possessed. She's animus possessed. That word is usually connected to religion, to witchcraft, or to primitive tribes.
There you have wonderful states of possession when, for instance, certain mediums go into trance and then they are possessed by a certain godhead. You have that, for instance, in Hawaii. Certain people go into trance and then certain godheads, female or male, enter them. And then they speak in a changed voice and the god speaks through them. Then they are possessed by a god. They call that they become the horse and the god becomes their rider. And I have a book on Hawaiian states of possession, and there is a photograph of 3 different male mediums incorporating the same god, Legbe. And they make exactly the same movement. Though they are, as human beings, different, when they are possessed, they behave all in the same way. They are possessed, we would say, by an archetypal figure, by a collective figure. Now, in waking up, these mediums sometimes don't remember what they have said in the trance state. They have been entered by a spirit. Now, this is an extreme of something which is normal in every human being. The whole day long, our field of consciousness is entered by autonomous complexes. You can notice that if you watch your own trend of thoughts, when, for instance, you are in a friendly, loving mood, and then you suddenly think of something negative, and then hatred and bitterness enters the scene, and a quarter of an hour later you muse revenge about something which has been done to you, and then your inner scene changes again, and you think of something else, and you get again in. We constantly switch moods, and therefore, if we watch ourselves, we are many people. I could give you a whole list of what kind of persons I can be. I can be an old peasant woman who thinks of cooking and of the house. I am a scholar who thinks about deciphering manuscripts. I am a psychotherapist who thinks about how to interpret people's dreams. I am a mischievous little boy who enjoys the company of 10 years old and playing mischief to adults. And so on. I could give you 20 more such characters. And they suddenly enter you. And if you know it, you can steer it. You can, for instance, keep them out of your system or play them and put them aside again. But if you are possessed, it means they enter you involuntarily and you act it out involuntarily. Now, for instance, the mischievous person I can call up and send back to sleep again when I feel now there's enough, I can't afford that yet. Now, that's not possession. And so that is one of the aims of psychotherapy, to help people to get on with their inner family of souls without getting possessed by them, and to keep a constant identity of themselves. Now, the animus is the most frequent possession in a woman, that she's certainly entered by a mood of male determination, cold, generalizing thinking, opinions, an impulse towards rash, brutal, determined action, which is not at all in her feminine character, which changes her character. You even see in a woman when she gets possessed by the animus that her face expression changes, her eyes change, her mouth expression of her mouth changes. I notice that when I get in the animus, I do this. I pull up my shoulders, like somebody who prepares for attacking battle. When I do that, then I know, oh, stop and relax. Feeling, if the woman stays with her feeling, then she can see the whole personal implications, and she can see the whole situation in a very personal and differentiated way. And then she generally can find the wisdom to handle it somehow. While if she falls into the animus, then she goes along with collective rules which make the man feel not to be understood anymore. Personal feeling is discouraged. You see it also in political debates nowadays. One of the most negative things one can say about an opponent is to say he uses only feeling arguments. He's not logical. As if logic were the only way to argument. One can also argument with the heart. One can also protest with one's feelings, not only with economic logic. But nowadays the absolute fashion is to be rational. And that is absolutely destructive to feeling. And it hits men and women equally, but women even more, because women in generally put more emphasis on personal relationship and personal feelings. And therefore they are hit first. And that's why women are nowadays so unhappy and in a general revolt against many things. They feel that they are thwarted of their life. Naturally, it hits men too, because if women go crazy and become disagreeable and cold, it reverberates on the sons and on the partners and on the men as well. But a man can stand a rationally organized world rather a bit longer than a woman. He's not happy in it finally himself either, but he can stand it longer. If a woman has this tendency of playing the anima to her father's little girl, and playing the anima, she assumes a divine role, because animus and anima are mythological, or in primitive language, divine figures, namely they belong to the dream world and not to outer reality. And therefore, a daughter who is flirting too much with her father and getting into a too close incestuous relationship with her father generally has a certain secret inflation. She assumes the dignity of a queen. She assumes that every man has to be at her feet like father, like she managed to bring forth with father. And she develops a certain haughtiness, feeling to be something special above the crowd. And therefore she becomes unapproachable to ordinary men. Men who try to approach her feel she is a princess, but not somebody you can comfortably take into your bed and have an animal relationship with. You can relate to them, so to speak, only on a high level. And some girls who have that father's princess-like attitude, therefore, are in great danger not to marry or to have difficulties in relating to men.
She lives to please men. She takes her own value of herself by what they think of her. She is obsessed with knowing how she can allure men into what amounts to her trap. For that kind of woman, there is no way of working with the shadow until you recognize that it's the relationship to the father that is driving her. She is continually being ambushed by that little girl's shadow. Just at the point where she seems to be standing up for herself, something comes in from underneath and cuts her off. She has to please daddy or daddy's surrogate. It would frighten her if she had to go in another direction and be who she actually is. So long as she is in the power of that shadow, she is not free. She's going to look for someone who can help her, someone who can put a projection on her to give her life, anything to escape living her own reality, which she can't find because the shadow is bigger than the ego. As Dr. von Franz says, we cannot see our own backside. But if our ego could see it, it would find it contemptible. Because you see, we put out signs, unconscious signs. We don't even know we're putting those signs out. And we can see them in other people when they happen. And we can think, how could she do that? That's absolutely contemptible. But in ourselves, we either have to see it in projection or recognize it in the dreams and say, what is this? So to take that energy back, to recognize that this is the relation to the Father that is being lived out, is extremely important. The compounding difficulty is that this energy aligns itself with Mother Nature for the propagation of the race. And therefore, it may not show up in a marriage until the children are 16, 17, 20 years old. Then the woman is able to be who she is. But so many women, I remember once a woman said to me, I squeezed the children's orange juice this morning. They just ran out the door. They didn't drink my orange juice. Who am I if they don't drink my orange juice? And she meant it. That's when you have to really deal with this shadow and work it through to the place where the energy can be who you really are. But you look at the energy with the Father. Was it sexual or was it spiritual? Now we move on to animus, the Latin word for spirit. It personifies the logos, the rational thinking function. If a woman is married to him in his dark aspect, that is, she may be married to him in fact, she may also be married to him within herself, probably both. It may make her rigid and opinionated. She thinks she knows everything. When she's alone, she thinks she knows nothing. Her aloneness feels like ice and glass to herself and to others, because her ideas are not her own. She has not bitten them off, chewed them, swallowed them, stomached them, digested them, and evacuated the waste. They are not part of her. And so there's an emptiness. She dreams that her teeth are falling out. We know these shadow figures well. We buy a new dress. We're going to a party. We look in the mirror. Not sure. Our partner or husband comes in and says, "Oh, what a beautiful dress, darling. How lovely. How lusciously buxom you are." And that's enough to get Neggy really going. Neggy? Who is Neggy? One has to have voices for these other little creatures inside. Neggy is the negative animus. And if you have a word like that, you can say, that is his voice, not mine, and I'm not going to be put down by it. If that voice gets going, it's the end of the party. Because when it's inner, it's far more subtle. It's amazing how the inner animus finds the exact person outside to reflect him. The inner problem has to be worked out in the relationship. Otherwise, we just go out to the same disaster to work it out in another place. Sooner or later, if you are going to mature, it has to be faced. You have to separate the voices in yourself. Von Franz has emphasized that the face that we turn to the unconscious is the face that is reflected back to us. In other words, if we are angry, we often get an angry response back from the unconscious. If we are diffident, the same kind of diffidence comes back to us. It's very important when we feel ourselves being chased by a demon that we stop and hold. Instead of running, some people run for a lifetime away from this thing that is running after them. If we can just stop and turn around and say, what do you want? Bring in all the strength you've got to say it or to look this thing in the face. It's amazing how you may get an answer and it will tell you what it wants. It may say, I want to love you. I want to know you. I want you to know me. And the demonic may suddenly become its opposite. Remember those two energies that are in opposition, the contraries that make that huge energy once it starts to move. So to turn around and face that energy may be to turn the devil into Christ. Remember, Satan and Christ were half brothers. Just to illustrate how alike and how different those two faces are, I want to tell you a story. I had been in analysis about a year, and I suddenly fell into a real despair. No seeming reason for it. But I cannot endure inner chaos. So I decided that I would find out what was wrong with me and figure out how to cure it. I got all the books I needed from the library, and I read day and night for a week. I figured out how all those complexes work, how they bang into each other, how they relate, and I knew what was wrong with me. And I went back to Dr. Bennett, full of joy, to tell him my great findings. And I talked for an hour, as fast as I could talk. And I saw that he was wilting in the chair. But the more he wilted, the faster I talked, and the more I ran over the very top of him. Not thinking, not realizing I was, not wanting to, but he was wilting. And I finally came to the end of my marvelous story with my great joy, realizing that there was some despair still simmering in the cellar. He helped me on with my coat. We went to the elevator. He turned to me and he said, Mrs. Woodman, if I were you, I would take my Animus for a good drink. Now, on the surface, that was a creative thing to do. I did put my animus to work. I did the best I could to come out of the doldrums. But in the actual situation, I rolled over him like an army tank. I left no room to see him, to relate to him in the moment. I simply was consumed with my own energy. This is the tragedy of this kind of negative. I call it the demon lover, because it has the energy to be creative, a fiery spirit. But if it is not related, it is a killer spirit, not only outside, but inside. This is the energy that can move in anorexia, when what should be the life force, the presence that is holding, the love that is holding, giving other people a chance to open into their own being. When that is absent, that energy can lure a woman to her death.
The father complex can raise hell in the unconscious of a woman. His authority is absolute, and he blocks her from contacting her own creative spirit. Here's a dream that shows the animus in a highly negative form, chastising the dreamer and driving her into a state of bitter isolation. She tells the dream in two parts.
I'm sitting in a cabin, a remotely placed cabin, and I'm sitting on the floor. I'm brushing the hair of a cat. I can't see the cat, but I know it's got orange fur because I'm pulling the fur of the cat out of the brush. A woman behind me is using the phone, and I'm sitting beside a man I don't recognize, but I know in the dream is my father. He's very tall and strongly built with short hair. He is chief of police, and we live in the police department of a remote settlement. The woman finishes using the phone and hangs it up and leaves, and he walks over to where she has been and tidies up something and turns and walks towards me and says, "They're crazy, they're just plain crazy." She's been making incestuous overtures to whoever she's been talking to on the phone.
In the beginning of the dream, she's brushing an orange cat. The cat stems in our countries originally from Egypt, and there it was a divine animal, and there was a cat goddess, Bastet, who was the goddess of music, sexuality, pleasure in life, and altogether fertility and life-embracing feminine fertility. The cat also, in contrast to dogs, has never sold its soul to man. The cat has always a kind of egocentric reserve somewhere. The cat says to us, "You may stroke me and you may serve me, but it never becomes your slave. And if you annoy it, it just walks out on you." And therefore the cat stands very often in women's dream as an image of something feminine, being independent and sure of itself. Just what modern women are so often lacking. That's why the cat goddess comes very often up in them as a positive model of feminine behavior. Because the cat is not brutal and displays no masculine features. It is very feminine, and all the same it's very firm and very identical with itself and very true to itself. The cat is not very amiable, but very true to itself. The beginning of the dream tells us that she's trying to approach and to look after her own femininity. And at that moment, the father walks up, and it's not her real father, but it is in the dream called her father, and it's a chief of police. And that shows that the image of the real father has become within her a chief of police. That would be that she now this woman tyrannizes herself with rules of behavior. In actual life, she has decided to become a good mother, and she forces herself in a tyrannical, harsh, authoritarian way to be a good mother. Her home, her children, and she and the family life has to be the way she thinks is right. But that's why the dream says it's the chief of police. The police is mainly engaged to look in a very collective, undifferentiated way that things go on orderly, conventionally orderly. And so the chief of police is that animus in woman who wants authority, order, behaving like everybody else, not doing anything shocking to everybody. A bit the opposite of the cat. The chief of police and the cat never get on very well, and that poor woman has both in her at the same time. And then the chief of police declares the woman to be crazy. So that would be a secret voice in her that whenever she follows her own feeling, something says, no, that's crazy, don't do that. You are crazy if you do that. Many people repress things within themselves by calling them crazy.
In the second part of the dream, tremendous anger suddenly springs up.
I'm standing beside my father. He has found a note that I've written to a boyfriend, and he is in rage. The kid is standing in front of him. I start to tremble violently and run from the room through a door that is usually locked by a hook high up on the door. I see that it isn't locked, and I run through into the bathroom. There's a man sitting on the floor in there who doesn't pay any attention to me. I'm wearing a parka and a hat, and I vomit into the toilet. As I'm doing this, I can see that my father is going to tie my hands together and hang me from the rafters in the cabin and beat me with a stick. I wake up from the dream shouting, "Harry, Harry!"
There again, we have the image, naturally, there exist in reality fathers who think they have to anxiously protect the integrity of their daughters and therefore pursue them when they write notes to their first boyfriend and so on. But here, this is no longer the case, as this woman is married and away from home. So she is doing that again to herself. And that is the greatest tragedy about the negative animus, that it always flares up with its power. Whenever a woman loves somebody, or a man or somebody, the animus comes and wants to cut it off. The negative animus tries to cut off women from any kind of relationship by belittling the relationship or calling it crazy or by some other means. The negative animus mainly manifests as a opinionated resistance against having feelings of love. And that's why, especially if a woman has a tendency to fall in love or to be even only interested in a man, then her animus comes up and makes her ruin the relationship.
How does a woman experience that inside herself?
Subjectively, you don't know, you think you are under a curse. Just when you want to meet the man or talk to the man you love, something makes you make him a scene, a tearful scene. And then you go home and cry and you say, I wanted to have a good relationship to him, and now... And then either you project and you say, and he is so nasty to me, or you are a bit more honest and then you say, and just because I want a relationship to him, I have made him a scene. And you just don't know what devil's mechanism makes you do that. But women always hit. If a woman hits you as a man, you can be sure she's interested in you. And she would really want to love you, but she doesn't know how to do it. Negative animus behaves here like a jealous lover. He wants to keep the woman and cut her off from all men. That is the typical mechanism. When she has some loving feelings towards any man, then comes this, you should not do that animus. Or it's projected. Classical case of a woman who once attacked Jung in the analytical hour worse than ever with the animus, and they went into what happened in the hour happened before. Jung had told her, whenever you have a feeling, that's when you attack. She had, on the way to Jung, seen beautiful strawberries, And her first impulse was, let's buy them and bring them to him. And then the Animus said, oh, he will say strawberries have an erotic meaning and he'll mock at me. So she didn't buy the strawberries. And then she arrived in a fierce mood and attacked Jung all the hour. Just because she had suppressed the strawberries. Just because if she had bought the strawberries, everything would have gone well, but she had repressed her own feeling.
You say that the Animus says this to a woman. Subjectively, what does she experience? That a voice is actually talking inside her head? Or what?
No, the worst about it is she experiences it as if she thinks it herself. It thinks in her, Jung is going to laugh at the strawberries. And she thinks that. And therefore, that is one of the long troubles of analytical work to make women distinguish between what they really think themselves and what it thinks in them, which they think is their own thoughts. And even when you have worked for years on that, I have sometimes negative thoughts against myself, which I would, if you asked me at the moment, say, yes, that's what I think about myself. And then I have a dream of a man raping me, and then I know, no, that was an evil animus in me who thought that.
What's the origin of that voice? Does it have its roots in the relationship with the father?
The first man a woman meets is the father, and the father has therefore a very decisive influence on a young girl. If the relationship to the father constellates itself negatively, the girl reacts negatively towards the father. The father might not be an evil man in himself, but the girl might not like him, or the father might be a difficult person. Then there's generally later also difficulties with men and difficulties to find her own masculine side. In other words, the animus, her own masculinity, is a problem to her. Such a woman also tends to behave towards herself as her father did to her. If the father was tyrannical, later, even if the father has died, the woman tyrannizes herself with ideas and opinions which still come from the father image. And so the attachment from the father and the relationship to the father plays always a big role in the development of a woman.
Can the negative animus interfere in the woman's relationship with her children in the same way?
The animus actually does interfere with the maternal feelings in certain women when they have not a strong maternal instinct. Then, for instance, the chief of police tells them that they should not get angry. Let's say a child misbehaves and whines and spills the soup over the plate, and it is a natural reaction to get angry and to shout a bit. If it doesn't go too far, it's quite normal for a child to accept that. But then the chief of police says, no, that's not good education. The child will have a trauma. And then she swallows it and gets angry and does something much worse to the child. That's why in this dream, the woman goes to the toilet and vomits. She obviously swallows too much, which she should not swallow. You vomit if you have eaten something you shouldn't eat, and which your stomach refuses. She stomachs too much. So I would have the guess that very often her children annoy her, and instead of howling on top of your voice, you are impossible brats, go to hell, she swallows everything. And children like strong reactions if they are carried by a loving undertone. I was once in an Italian inn where a mason's woman was cooking for the whole inn, and around her were about 12 little children, and she constantly howled at them and banged them in the head. And you saw, I've never seen as blossoming children, because it was all carried on in a warm atmosphere of maternal love.
Can you give us an example of a well-known negative animus figure?
Well, the classical example of the destructive animus whom the woman has at all costs to escape is the famous fairy tale of Bluebeard, where she gets into a castle where the owner, she discovers secretly murdered all his former wives. And when she discovers this terrible secret, she can only just with the help of her brothers escape again. So that is the classical image of the destructive animus. If a woman cannot escape these self-destructive, self-annihilating thoughts, it might even lead to a severe psychological disturbance, or at least such women who can't escape their bluebeard become generally isolated, bitter women who have no men loving them and find no partner and live in bitter isolation, if not worse situation.
These women are stripped of their capacity for human love and affection.
It has to do with the animus, namely that they allow self-destructive opinion, impulses, actions to their psychological personality. They, so to speak, themselves with the animus. I have, for instance, often when I have indulged in destructive thoughts about myself or about my work, dreamt of being pursued by hostile men. The dream saying those negative thoughts are not you, they are hostile animi in you, and you should run away from these kind of thoughts. They destroy you if you stay with it.
Could you be more specific?
For instance, just take the woman who is annoyed with her little boy spilling the whole soup. Her natural feeling would be say, damn it, now you have again spilled the soup. And then the pedagogic animus says in her, you mustn't speak loud to your little boy. That's pedagogically not wise. Then she her feeling. With her opinion that she shouldn't speak up, she her natural feeling. She her feminine reaction by having an opinion that she shouldn't have a feminine natural reaction.
We were talking earlier about how men can become paralyzed by women's tears, the crocodile tears when they get hurt. And you use the image of the animus of the woman becoming this great hook of a man, and then picking the woman up as a little girl and holding the little girl in front of him. So the animus then can come from behind and smash the man, but shielded by the little girl, which the man hits if he tries to strike back at the attack coming at him from the animus. Can you talk about that image?
Well, that is only a simile because women like to do that double play to a man when they are in the animus. They brutally attack the man, or they viciously, with their tongue, attack the man. And when the man hits back, they say they are such a delicate, frightened little child, and now the brutal man is attacking them again, though they have attacked first. And so I always call that the woman having a gangster animus who uses the woman like a little girl and puts it in front. And one can't shoot down the gangster because he puts the touchy little girl in front of him so that one cannot shoot at him. And that's what women, they play at the same time. The touchy little girl who the man may not say woo to them because they are so uncertain of themselves. And the tyrannical man makes them even more uncertain. And the man doesn't listen to them and so on. And at the same time, they themselves viciously attack by making chiding remarks or aggressive remarks to the man.
Let's say the man is moved by the woman's tears. What's he supposed to do?
Generally, men feel very awkward when women cry, and women cry to make men feel guilty. And so men feel guilty, they feel they are a brute who has made the woman cry, and so they feel uncomfortable and awkward, and they generally react in some inappropriate way because they feel cornered.
Is there anything a man can do when he's attacked by a woman's animus?
A man could just talk with her reasonably, but a man just generally gets irritated, and then he can't talk to her reasonably anymore. When she kind of, in a childish, plaintive, reproachful voice, reproaches him all the time that he is guilty for all her misery, then he having weak feeling feels awkward and gets irritated, either doesn't answer or slams the doors or picks up the newspaper and doesn't answer or turns on the television and sulks, and then she gets wilder and wilder.
Do you think this is more common now than in the past?
No, I think it only comes more to the surface. Women are great masters in keeping things hidden if they want to, and in societies where women are not allowed to rebel, they just swallow it all down and turn sour and bitter. And with us now, it's allowed to rebel, and therefore it comes out more. Generally, the man, if the woman attacks him with the animus, feels helpless and has a helpless, vague feeling. Therefore, he has to refuse all that nonsense and say, when you talk in that whiny baby way to me, all sorts of nonsense, I'm not even going to listen. But he must at the same time make a gesture that the woman feels, if only she were herself, he would love her. For a man to deal with an animus-possessed woman is to love, to give a hand to the woman to say, I love you, I still love you, and to slap the animus at the same time. So that the woman feels, when I'm myself, he still loves me. When I'm not myself, he gets angry. And by that, the man can help the woman out. Then she begins to notice what is herself and what is not herself. We will see it's the same thing with the anima of a man.
You disagree with the woman's lib position. You're saying that the woman should just give way to the man. Let the man run it his way. Woman just sits back and suffers.
Yeah, but she can do also what she likes, and men have to suffer. I feel there is mutual freedom. Married couples should give each other more mutual freedom and more mutual understanding. So there will come moments where I will remind the husband, I convinced your wife not to put anything in your way when you did that, but now you must not put anything in her way when she does that.
In North America, many women are becoming involved in affairs. The basic requirement being that there's no feelings involved. If feelings become involved either way, then it's over. They seem to want unrelated sexuality. How do you see this?
I think it has two roots. One, the deeper root is that the many North American women are very unhappy, basically because of the whole way of the social life in North America. It is not enough rooted. People move too much about. Women have very little chance to establish roots to the earth, to a garden, to a house, to a community, to a surrounding where they can stay. It is this constant moving which rather pleases men, but is very unfortunate for women. And that damages the women's instinctuality, and then they want to replace it by sex, because that is then, so to speak, the last possibility to have something to do with their own body or to confirm their own physical existence. But it's a desperate move, which is a surrogate for something quite different, a surrogate for having no feminine life, no feminine rhythm of life. The whole rhythm of the North American life is too hectic for a woman. It damages women more than men. It's not good for men either, but it damages women even more. And then there is this whole world of advertising and this whole social idea of success and girls having to date boys and inquiring in, are you dating a boy already, and so on. And it is all, so the whole relationship between the sexes becomes an affair of success, of social achievement instead of feeling. And if a woman has not a strong relationship to her own instinctual feminine nature, then she falls for that kind of nonsense. Women can run sex with the head, so to speak, completely cool, without feeling, as a means to confirm their self-esteem. I must have a man, I must have an affair in order to prove myself to be normal, and because one should have that, because it is a success to have a man in one's pocket. But it has nothing to do with the instinctual, real feelings of a woman. she overruns those with a theoretical idea of having to have a man and having to have sex. And then the whole thing is a cold power game which leads to nothing. And then she runs a success life with trying to conquer men and putting them in her pocket and boasting to her girlfriends about it. And it has nothing to do anymore with her real feminine feelings.
Would you elaborate on the fact that they want sex without feeling? No emotional commitment either way.
Because when there is an emotional commitment, there is at once conflict. And then one is easily hurt. If one is emotionally and committed with one's feeling to a human being, then one risks a lot of misunderstandings and hurts, because even the best partner will hurt you from time to time. You are exposed, you are vulnerable, you are dependent. And such women don't want to go into that. They are afraid of it. They are afraid of the complications of the heart, so to speak. And they prefer to run it like a cold businessman. Just have the pleasure of it and goodbye. Nothing to do with you personally. It is also a rejection of the feminine fate, because it has always been the fate of women to be personally interested in the man and to be therefore vulnerable. And what about losing your partner? What about your partner going away with another woman? What about your partner traveling for years in foreign countries and not returning to you? That is the eternal pain of women, because women want a lasting personal relationship, and men very often do not care about it, or lead a life where they cannot care about it too much. They have to attend their own business. And that is a tragedy between men and women. And such women who don't want personal commitment want to escape that tragedy. They want to escape suffering, and they get into much worse suffering naturally.
When you talk about the instinct, you're not talking about sexuality per se.
The sexual instinct is one instinct, but there are many other instincts as well. There's the instinct of self-preservation, and there are social instincts and aggressive instincts. There's a whole host of different instincts, and the animal represents the totality of the instinctual world. An animal never consists only of sexual desires. A dog, for instance, those Dobermans, they have aggression, they have the need for food, they have the need for affection, they have the need for being with other dogs, and so on and on. And so if a woman singles out the sexual instinct as the only instinct and runs it with her head, then it is contra-instinctual, because it's out of balance. It's choosing one instinct against all the others, which nature never does. Nature keeps a kind of homeostasis or general equilibrium between the instincts, and turns one instinct on and then the other off and on and off again. If we observe animal life, it's periodical. There are periods for the sexual instinct, there are situations for the aggressive instinct, there are situations of the collective herd instinct, and so on. And those rhythms are regulated by totality, by the wholeness of the being. So only man is stupid enough that he can pick out one instinct and perform only that one instinctual performance, and then naturally that is against the wholeness of the instinctual world. And then he does harm to his own body and to his whole life.
But women's liberation would say that unrelated sexuality is an achievement. Women can do now on a large scale sexually what men have been doing for centuries.
Well, I think that as far as there are still Victorian prudishness around, that is a good idea, but it is the least of the problem, because I would say that is now achieved in our modern world. A woman can live her sexual life as she likes. And so that is no longer the problem. Now comes the much bigger problem, namely a liberation of the heart. That is that's the program of the next 50 years.
Liberation of the heart.
There are two possibilities of human connection. The one is technical, by the boss and the employee, the bus conductor and the passenger and so on. And that is organized by rules and even organized nowadays by psychological rules. There are training programs for managers, how they manage the employees and so on. And that is all rationalized. And the one thing which is always left out is the liking and the disliking. And the feeling reaction, for instance, what does not count, a woman would sometimes like to say, this sounds all very logical, but I have a strong feeling against it. No, nobody would put any attention to that nowadays. If she cannot formulate it as a logical deduction, just to say my feeling instinct tells me this is no good, then one just ignores it, one walks over her. And men do the same thing. Men have feelings too, but they ignore them. They think they have a funny feeling in their stomach and they think, oh, that is a jet lag or something, and they rationalize it away. They don't listen to the reactions of the heart. And that's what so many so-called primitive people or so-called people of underdeveloped countries reproach us, quite rightly. Because whatever their shortcomings are, they listen more to those feelings. Australian Aborigine, you could still say, today I have a bad feeling, I won't move out of the camp. Or that fellow seems to make a very good offer to us, but I somehow don't like him, and therefore I'll keep away from him. That you can tell still to an Australian Aborigine, but if you say that to a white American businessman, he'll just think, oh, well, women.
The development of masculinity can be very important in a woman's life. It's her capacity to act on her own behalf, and without it, she can feel trapped and paralyzed. In these 3 dreams, which occurred over a period of 4 years, we see the struggle involved in the development of creative masculinity. This woman left her marriage and established herself in a new lifestyle. In the first dream, there's no masculine figure, just a mother's shadow.
In this dream, there's an enormous king-size mattress. I mean, huge. It seems to be suspended. There's nothing else around it. No sheets, nothing. I'm on it, laying this way. Over to my right, I feel that there's something there. I look over. It's a woman walking along at a distance with 2 Dobermans on leashes, black Dobermans. As she comes towards me, I keep watching her. She comes closer and closer. When she gets to about 3 feet beside me, she looks down at me. I have this feeling of really being aware of her looking down at me with disgust. She has a babushka around her head, tied. She looks at me, lets go of the leashes, and the 2 black dogs just zap right at my throat.
The whole problem is already told in the first sentence of the dream, where the dreamer says, I was lying on a mattress floating in the air. The dreamer is shown that she has no relationship to the earth. She has not her feet on the earth. She has no contact with reality. And that means she has also no real contact with her own body. And she's living in ideas, in theoretical conceptions of life, in illusions. And then a woman comes towards her with those Doberman pinchers, and those would be the earthly forces, the instinctual force. The dog represents our domesticated instincts, but they are hostile. They are associated to the Nazis using them. So because she's floating in the air, the instinct turns against her, is resentful against her because she doesn't attend her own animal instincts. And the woman has a babushka on her head, which reminds her of her mother?
Well, I'm Polish, and that's a very common Polish sort of tradition. Babushkas are very it's everybody wears a babushka either on the head or around the shoulders. My mother wore one.
Now, the mother for a woman represents the instinctual basis, the matrix, also the whole area of the uterus. If a woman has trouble with her mother, she has very often trouble with menstruation and with her own sexual functions and her maternal feelings. The mother is, so to speak, the earth from which she lives. And that mother figure lets the Dobermans loose on her a fierce, hostile, negative attack of the instincts. So the dream says, because you are floating in midair, because you have lost touch with reality, the instinctual basis of your femininity has become hostile to you and is threatening you, which goes very well with the fact that she became afterwards ill. Because if one lives against one's own animal instincts, then illness is in the offing.
Within 6 weeks of the second time I had the dream, I ended up in the hospital with a very serious infection, pelvic infection.
The dogs attack the throat. Is there significance to that?
Well, I think, first of all, when a dog wants to really kill, he attacks the throat, he bites the artery on the throat. That is the killing movement. So it shows that the dogs mean real business, that they are really not only playfully attacking, but it makes the attack really dangerous. We can also look at the symbolism of the throat, and the throat is, for instance, in the Hinduistic teaching of the chakra centrum, is the center of the word, of the logos, of the spoken word. She believes in the world of words. She doesn't listen to what the instinct speaks out of one's stomach or from deeper centers. That goes together with her floating in the air. She probably mirrors herself in her own reflections as a successful woman, and that is living in the world of ideas and words. And that is the so-called Vishuddha Centra in the Hinduistic chakra teaching, and that's what is attacked.
Is it possible to actually diagnose a disease from a dream?
After the event, one can say so, but I wouldn't have dared to say so ahead of time. I would have only said you are living against your own instincts, and that will very likely end up in some kind of disease. Because it's obvious if you eat too much or too little, or if you sleep too much or too little, if you do anything against your instinct, you are likely to catch a disease.
The next dream she dreamt 3 years later, after she left her marriage. It's interesting that the shadow figure of the mother changes from the extremely negative figure to a positive figure that brings her down to the ground.
In this dream, I'm in a room. There's my mother and a male with me. Okay, it's a very tiny room. There's hardly any furniture in it except one bed on one side. There's not too much going on in it. We're just kind of standing there. Then I get this feeling that there's a body outside the door. I walk over to it, open the door, and sure enough, there's a body. It's like a central hallway with doors going in. I look down on the ground. There is a body there. You can't see the body. It's wrapped in a sheet, but I know that it's a male. I shut the door, and now we have to leave. The three of us have to go. So we go to the back door, open it, and to get down, it's an incredibly steep staircase, wooden, and just an unbelievable sort of drop. The stairs are open, they're not closed in. It's really dangerous. My mother goes first. Me and the male go behind her. She starts walking down. She takes a couple of steps, and I'm being very, very cautious. And then all of a sudden, she does this beautiful leap from way up high, lands flat on the ground, both feet, excellent jump. I'm just in awe. It's just wow. Then everything changes. I'm by myself. I'm walking through like a village, a small town. It's quite barren. There's a lot of sand. As I approach the center of the square, there's a platform, which is about 3 or 4 steps up. There's stairs leading to it. It's a hanging man's platform, an absolute square made out of wood, an old, weathered kind of wood. There's 4 pillars around the corners, and then in the center, there's the hanging man's pole. I approach it, look at it, and there's a man hanging there. I look again. He's hanging, but by his feet. I'm not alarmed at it or anything. I look at it, and then I walk by.
Though the animus is often spoken of as a nuisance in the woman, he has also very positive and important functions, because a woman whose animus is lamed or is not functioning is too passive and therefore too exposed to the vicissitudes of life. She cannot take her own destiny into her own hands, and therefore the animus really is a very positive figure. This dream here shows that the woman is with her mother, and actually she was very much wrapped up in her mother, and therefore dominantly feminine, and had not developed her own masculinity. And this own masculinity is shown in the dream as wrapped up in linen, dead, lying before the door. That is the part of her personality which has died and should be resuscitated. She therefore has to leave the place where she is. She has to change her life situation. And the path is leading downwards, a rather dangerous step. She has to come on a deeper down level of reality, become more realistic, realizing her practical life situation. And she succeeds in doing so, and then she comes to a village, an old village, old-fashioned village, which probably mirrors the old-fashioned way of life, where women were not allowed to have any initiative of their own, where they had this kind of passive, submissive life of the past. And there she finds that in the center square of the village, a man is hung up. In that atmosphere of old-fashioned femininity, all the positive masculine forces in woman are suspended, literally suspended. They are killed. They cannot act, and therefore the dream shows what is wrong with her. She probably, being in a very difficult outer situation, would be inclined to think that all her bad luck lies in the outer situation and in her negative marital situation. And the dream shows her that the real trouble is that her own masculinity is dead, is not functioning, and has to be rescued and revived again.
Would you amplify the image of the hanging man?
Hanging is, in general, a kind of negative deification. After all, the god of Western civilization is a hanged man. And it means the moment of being elevated into the spiritual realm and be recognized as a god, but at the expense of human reality. One is, so to speak, hung up in eternity, and the human reality is dead. And that's why, for instance, the old Germans hung up their prisoners in honor of Wotan. And when the wind was blowing them back and forth on the gallows or the trees where they hung them, that was meant that Wotan, the spiritual god, was taking them to them. But it also means what the English word says, to be in a suspended state. Suspended means hanging. So it means that all her masculine intelligence and capacity of action and courage and all her masculine qualities are existing but suspended, in suspense, and not touching the reality. They are turned upside down, where the man should have his head up, which means she should have her head up herself and think her situation over and take it in hand like a man And all that is suspended and condemned to inaction through a old-fashioned attitude towards life on one side and through a too great identity with her mother on the other side.
The next dream occurred after she was rejected by a lover. She had told him that she had strong feelings of love and affection toward him, and he said the feelings were not reciprocated, that he saw her just as a... The dream begins, she's sitting in the balcony of a movie theater.
All of a sudden, I have to go to the washroom. I'm looking for a washroom. I get up, I walk towards the back of the theater. There's an usherette standing there. We go to the washroom together. It's kind of a strange wooden door. It's a storage area washroom somehow. We both sort of go in, or she opens the door and kind of holds it for me, and I enter it. Now, to go in there and pee, I realize you can't shut the door. As I'm thinking that, a man enters in a suit, and I'm outraged because this is a ladies' washroom, so I tell him to get out. Then I see another man coming towards me. Now, this is quite short, stockily built, okay? He's coming towards me. I'm outraged at the fact that these men are in the ladies' washroom. The stocky man comes right towards me. I look over at the other man. He's a Taekwondo master. And I look over at the stocky man, and he has assumed the stance of, the martial arts sort of thing. And then in a leap, he's at my throat.
She has been terribly hit before this dream by the negative answer of that partner. Now, the dream changes that hit or represents that shocking hit, but in a different form. First, he shows that it happened when she wanted to pee in a toilet. Now, to pee generally has a symbolism of expressing oneself genuinely. Peeing is one of the few functions man cannot repress. We can repress sleep for a while, we can repress eating for a while, but peeing is just above us. It rules us. And therefore it is an expression of, here I am, that's how I am. It always means to be genuine. And the dream says, look here, for once you have tried to be genuine when you asked this man, do you love me? And inferred at the same time that you love him. That was your true feeling. And you got hit, but you did not get hit really by him, the partner who told you he's not interested in you. You got hit by somebody else. You got hit by this karate hero, by that horrible man who hits with a karate gesture your throat. Now this karate man is within you, as if the dream says you did not get the shock from outside, you got it from your own nature, which reminds one of the fact that Jung once said, there is no difficulty which we ultimately are not to ourselves. We are our own difficulty. And her love difficulty is within herself. She has such a karate fellow in her, and she can only therefore develop further or become herself if she realizes that the terrible shock she fetched herself in the outer world is something, a problem in her own nature, and that she has to face up to the fact that she has such a hard, fighting man in herself who devaluates her as a woman.
Now, this figure, this karate figure who attacks women when they become genuine with their feelings, will you talk about him in terms of society in general?
I would say the modern style in the Western societies, and beginning also now in China and in the Marxist societies, organize the masses with computers and to discourage every personal feeling. In the West, for instance, it's a rule in big business to rotate men around in different places just to prevent too much personal attachment. Personal attachment is looked at to be forming a clique. Personal feeling is discouraged. You see it also in political debates nowadays. One of the most negative things one can say about the opponent is to say he uses only feeling arguments. He's not logical, as if logic were the only way to argument. One can also argument with the heart. One can also protest with one's feelings, not only with economic logic. But nowadays the absolute fashion is to be rational. And many schools of modern psychology are also rational. If something is wrong in the marriage, one has to rationally reorganize sex life, have extramarital affairs, or use practical new positions, Kama Sutram positions, or fix up the thing rationally as if it were a broken down car. And treating men like a broken down car. And that is absolutely destructive to feeling. And it hits men and women equally, but women even more, because women in generally put more emphasis on personal relationship and personal feelings. And therefore they are hit first. And that's why women are nowadays so unhappy and in a general revolt against many things. They feel that they are thwarted of their life. Naturally, it hits men too, because if women go crazy and become disagreeable and cold, it reverberates on the sons and on the partners and on the men as well. But a man can stand a rationally organized world rather a bit longer than a woman. He's not happy in it finally himself either, but he can stand it longer.
A woman's inner man can make her life heaven or hell. In his negative form, he's a seductive swindler who cuts a woman off from her feminine identity. But in his positive role, he brings her spiritual strength and connects her to the self.
In this sort of open stretch of river, in the water, a group of people, including my nearly ex-husband and a colleague of his who I was quite fond of. And I found that they wouldn't let me swim. I really like moving when I swim, and every time I started, I found that they were restricting me. And this made me feel very unhappy, and I woke up at that point.
Many men say that the day they got married, the relationship was over. Put the ring on the finger and the woman disappeared. Is there any truth in that?
Jung once said, women are absolutely lovely and charming and chase the men till they reach the point of being married, and then they transform into devils and harass the man from morning till evening and so on. And that is because marriage is a being pinned down into a specific destiny and situation, and something in the woman resents it. Before you are married, you can dream about what you could do, would do. You can dream about marrying a film reporter and traveling all over the world, or marrying a rich man and doing this, or marrying a farmer and having your own farm, or whatever your desires are. Your life is full of possibilities. But as soon as you marry that man you love and you want to marry, then you are pinned down to him for better and for worse, and something freedom-loving in the woman resents it. And that's why generally these kind of negative animus, countersexual figures come up and attack them. And that becomes very often even worse during pregnancy, because as long as there is not a child on the way, one can still toy with the idea one might divorce. But if a child is on the way, then one is really pinned down for the next 10, 15 years, for sure. And therefore, the wild, freedom-loving side in a woman revolts and attacks negatively.
A few weeks ago, when I was entering my 5th month of pregnancy, I had a very unsettling dream. I've been having quite a few, and other women in my prenatal class have been saying they've been having rather upsetting, nightmarish type dreams, but this one for me was particularly upsetting. I was standing out in a field, and there were fields all around me, nice rolling hills to one side. On my left side, there was a farmhouse, a big old farmhouse that could hold a lot of people. And I realized I was part of sort of a ranch farm commune. Just then, I looked up to my right and saw some cowboys riding down a hill who were also part of the commune.
When they reached the bottom of the hill, they started shooting at people that were coming out of the house, mainly women, children, pregnant women, old people. And I was very upset to see this and asked what they were doing. And they said that the only way they could make a profit was to get rid of the surplus people, that the commune could feed everyone then, but to make a really good profit, they'd have to get rid of some people.
This is a typical dream which many pregnant women have. The state of pregnancy, especially for a modern active woman, a very difficult state, because for the sake of pregnancy and for the coming child, the woman should fall into a state of musing, brooding, quietness. Pregnant women should be able to live a quiet rhythm of life, and naturally their own impulse towards action and outer activity comes into conflict with that.
In this dream, I was coming up Pitchcombe Hill, and I was on a bicycle with a group of friends, and I was amazed by how much puff I had as I was coming up this hill, and I felt full of vitality. I was actually able to overtake some of the people that I was cycling with. When we got near the top of the hill, I noticed great clouds coming over and that we were going to have a storm. Some of the men that I was with suggested that we stop to wait till the storm passed. So we got off our bicycles near the top and looked down across the valley. Then we saw a huge wave in the distance, and out of this wave came some enormous fish which slithered along the ground and came towards us. One of the men that I was with said that he thought they must have come all the way from the South Seas, and then he said that he felt that the Armageddon was coming. At this I felt slight panic, but also a comfortable feeling because I was surrounded by friends and I felt that it would be all right.
How can a pregnant woman deal with her negative animus?
Generally, the poor husband has to pay for that. He's the one who caused it. He has put her into that pregnant situation and into that pinned down situation. And modern women then say, now I'm always confined to this flat, and I cannot fulfill my personality, and I cannot do what I want to do. And it's his fault. Though she wanted to marry him, it's now his fault.
And what's the solution to that?
That she does as much as she can develop her personality. But she says, now I have my husband and I wanted him, and I have a child and I wanted that child, and that's all right. But that doesn't prevent me from developing what else I have and want to do. We have to do simply both. Continue to develop your independent personality and accept the earthly confinement in faith. Naturally, one can't have the penny and the cake. I often say to young women, look here, you wanted that husband, you wanted those children. Now you can't throw it all over and go to the university and become a university professor. You have to make a compromise. But you can, for instance, study. Do some studying in spite of having children, and prepare to later build up a more masculine career when the children are older and go to school. And then there's still a second half of life where a woman can fulfill her more masculine desires, how to live.
There's a painting of Holman Hunt's in which Christ is portrayed carrying a lantern and knocking on the doorway of the heart.
There you have the animus in his positive function as the guide towards inner truth. You have, for instance, very often in dreams of women, male angels. Or if you think of the French saint Jeanne d'Arc, she was always guided by the archangel Michael and advised by the archangel Michael in her political and heroic career. So that would be the positive animus, whom I would call an innermost instinctual awareness of the inner truth, a basic inner truthfulness, which becomes a guiding spirit for a woman towards her individuation, towards becoming her own self. That is the opposite to the negative animus, who is a big swindler.
So you don't feel that masculinity in a woman is necessarily negative?
The masculinity is just as exceedingly positive as negative. It's only in certain aspects negative, and mainly negative when women don't know how to have the wisdom and don't know how to relate to it. A woman who has no animus, has no pep, no enterprise, no intelligence, no initiative, she's a very poor creature. She's just a womb producing children and a hand cooking in the kitchen. That's a woman without animus is nothing. So the animus is just as much an exceedingly positive thing. It is the intelligence, it's the spiritual longing, it's the whole spirituality of woman is connected with the animus. But you can say the animus, therefore, has the range of extension between devil and Holy Ghost.
Do you feel a woman should be educated and have a career?
A woman should be educated and should have a career, but she should not be possessed by it. She should not be carried away by it. Otherwise, she loses her feminine identity. But if she keeps her feminine identity, then it adds to her personality a spiritual dimension of activity, intelligence, willpower, and all positive qualities. Makes her into a personality. Jung was always very much for women studying. He said that women who don't make a career or study or do some profession have generally even much worse animus. They lead a seemingly feminine life at home as mothers and householders, but their masculinity then becomes something sour and negative with which they torture their husband. It's much better to occupy the animus, then he makes less mischief. Now, a boy in a woman's dream generally means a new enterprise. Young boys are the epitome of doing something all the time. Jung always said a boy that is the honest enterprise. And that honest enterprise we must therefore probably put together with the fact that she has begun painting. That was her first undertaking where she did something for her own psyche, for her own self, and where there was an honest enterprise which was not looking for success or anything, but doing a thing for its own sake. And that's the little boy, and there something comes into being, a new aspect of her personality comes into being. But that painting is only instrumental, because the little boy then changes into a little girl. And that means this painting she's now doing has no purpose in its own. It is instrumental to bring forth a new part of her feminine personality, of bringing out her femininity. And that is the little girl, her true femininity. That little daughter of the dark-haired woman would be her true feminine identity, which is still very young, and she begins only to have a hunch of that true new identity, and that's why it's still a little girl. And there she discovers with horror that that little girl is probably having been and violated and ill-treated.
Who girl?
We must probably say she herself, or her animus, her masculine side, her career-mindedness. Behind her own back, she had her true femininity, which wanted to grow within her. But the girl is not dead. The problem can be mended in the dream. The dream only in a very dramatic form wants to show her, if you go on with your social life and your career-mindedness, you have something within yourself, which is just born and wants to grow within you, a new kind of woman. To think, to reflect means to bend back upon oneself, to find one's own identity. And the mirror shows one's objective, true face. Therefore, it's very often a shock to look at oneself in the mirror. And if you think of the mirror in the fairy tale Snow White, the mirror tells the truth to the old witch and says that Snow White is more beautiful than she is, and the witch gets furious at that. So the mirror is also what shows the reflection, which shows the true identity. Now, both these women at the beginning of the dream accuse their husband to have taken away their possibility of seeing their own identity. You can say that is what the women's lib people all say. It's always the husbands. They have not their own identity. They feel that their own feminine identity has been stolen to them, and the cheapest way is to accuse the husband. Now, the husband might have contributed to that because men naturally carry in themselves all sorts of aesthetical and romantic ideas of how an ideal woman should be. Generally, this image they carry within themselves is influenced by their mother. They expect their wife to be, if they love their mother, their wife should be as similar to their mother as possible. If they hated their mother, their wife should be as different from their mother as possible. And that women having a natural tendency to comply to the wishes of their surrounding, to relate personally, women very often feel forced to play a role towards their husband, to fulfill his expectations instead of being themselves. And then they naturally feel bitter, as if the husband had stolen their possibility of being themselves. But in general, it is a projection. It is really that their own ambition or their own animus, that means their masculine drive, their wish for career and ambition, has estranged them from their feminine identity. Social life in general, and not the husband. But the plain result in the dream is a feeling of despair, of having lost the mirror, the possibility of seeing oneself how one really is.
If we leave empty space within ourselves or outside, it can fill quickly with vampire energy. That figure can literally take hold of the neck, separate the head from the body, separate the feelings that are coming from the musculature, from the inner body, from the thinking. That ends in loss of soul. The woman experiences herself as having been. Sexuality, loathing, and rage belong together. This is where the love of one woman for another is essential for healing. It is also where the Black Madonna can come into a dream with her great beating heart, take the dreamer on her lap, hold her close, and she can know that she can be herself, think how she wants to think, do what she wants to do, and be loved, because that's who she is. We have to remember that vampire creates vampire. Vampire movies are still very popular, and millionaire survivors are the competitors who can endure the most humiliation. Can anyone care about $1 million for that?
If something in this video resonated with your own experience, you are welcome to continue the work with me. I offer one-on-one depth conversations where we explore dreams, inner conflicts, relationships, and the psychological patterns that shape our lives. I also host small Jungian circles where people meet regularly to reflect together, share honestly, and support one another on the path of individuation. If you feel called to go deeper, you will find the links in the pinned comment. I would be glad to walk a part of this path with you.